The night Cale Ashbourne became king, he did not smile. He stood at the edge of the great hall, staring at the empty seat beside the throne, the seat that should have belonged to his mate, Lyra Sinclair. 3 years had passed since the ambush that took her from him, yet the pain still sat in his chest, like a stone that never softened. On that terrible night, his patrol had been attacked at the border by wolves from the Draven pack. When his warriors reached the ravine, they found only Lyra's torn cloak and a pool of blood staining the rocks. Her body was never found. The healers said no wolf could survive such wounds and such a fall. So the pack mourned her, buried an empty coffin with her name carved into the stone, and Cale took the throne alone, wearing grief like a second skin. He ruled well. He was fair, strong, and respected, but he was cold in a way that worried the elders. He refused every woman offered to him in marriage, every arranged bond suggested to secure the pack's future. He kept Lyra's old room untouched, her scent long faded from the sheets, and every year on the day of her disappearance, he walked to the ravine alone and stood there until the sun set. His guards learned not to follow him on that day. Some things, they understood, a king must grieve by himself. What no one in the Ashbourne pack knew was that Lyra Sinclair had not died in that ravine. She had been thrown from the cliff during the fight, but she had survived the fall, badly injured and unconscious, only to be found by scouts from the very pack that had attacked her. Instead of finishing what the ambush started, the Draven scouts sold her to a hidden network of traders who dealt in stolen wolves. These traders specialized in erasing a wolf's past. They used an old and forbidden technique involving moonsilver, a metal that when pressed against a wolf's skin during a ritual chant could suppress memories, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. Lyra was given a new name, a collar of plain silver, and put to work in the trader's hidden compound, far from Ashbourne territory. For 3 years, she lived without knowing who she truly was. She scrubbed floors, carried water, and obeyed orders from masters who called her nothing more than the Quiet One, because she rarely spoke. Sometimes, at night, fragments came to her in dreams, a golden crown resting on dark hair, a voice calling her name with such tenderness it made her wake in tears she could not explain, a pair of amber eyes that felt like home, though she could not picture the face they belonged to. She told no one about these dreams, because she had learned that questions were dangerous in that place. Everything changed the day a healer was brought into the compound to tend to an injured trader. The healer, an old woman named Marta, who secretly despised the network she was forced to serve, noticed the plain silver collar around Lyra's neck and recognized it for what it was. When no one was watching, Marta pressed her palm to the collar and whispered old words, words meant to break a moon-silver binding rather than strengthen it. The collar cracked and fell away. That night, Lyra's memories returned all at once, crashing into her mind like a flood breaking through a dam. She remembered her name. She remembered the Ashbourne pack, the training grounds where she had learned to fight, the elders who had taught her their history, and most of all, she remembered Cale. She remembered their bonding ceremony, the warmth of his hand in hers, the promise they had made under the full moon. She remembered the ambush, the fall, and then nothing, until this moment. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her hand against her chest, trying to hold herself together against the weight of everything she had lost. Marta helped her escape that same night, giving her a small pouch of coins and pointing her toward the nearest town. "Go," the old woman said. "Find your way back to whoever waits for you. Not everyone gets a second chance. Do not waste yours." Lyra never learned what became of Marta after that night, but she carried the woman's kindness with her every step of the journey that followed. The road back to herself was not easy. Lyra was weak, thin, and carried scars both seen and unseen. She had no pack, no money beyond what Marta had given her, and no proof of who she claimed to be. She worked odd jobs in small towns, slept in barns and under bridges, and slowly, carefully, made her way toward Ashbourne territory. Along the way, she heard whispers about the trading network that had held her, and she began asking careful questions, not for revenge yet, but because something told her she needed to find the vault where her belongings had been taken the night of the ambush. Buried deep in her recovered memories was the image of her hiding something precious just before she lost consciousness at the ravine. something she could not quite name until the memory sharpened weeks later. It was her crown. Not a crown of gold and jewels worn for show, but the ceremonial Ashbourne coronation crown, marked with the royal sigil, the very crown meant to be placed on the head of the true Alpha King during his coronation and his re-coronation every 3 years after. She had been wearing it that night, returning from a ceremony rehearsal, when the ambush struck. In the chaos, she had wrenched it from her head and thrown it into a crevice in the rocks, hidden from her attackers, before the fall took her. The Draven scouts who found her must have later gone back for it, and somehow it had ended up passed along the same dark trade routes that had claimed her. Lyra tracked its trail for months, moving from town to town, following rumors through markets that dealt in stolen and smuggled goods. She learned to be careful, to ask questions without drawing attention, to defend herself when trouble found her anyway. The girl who had once needed rescuing slowly became a woman who could survive on her own. Finally, in a hidden vault beneath the very trading post where she had first been sold, she found it. The crown, dulled with dust but unmistakably real, the Ashbourne sigil still etched clearly into its band. She held it against her chest and wept, not from sorrow this time, but from something closer to hope. It was there, among the trader's old records, that she learned the date. In 2 days, the Ashbourne pack would hold its re-coronation ceremony. The ritual required every 3 years to renew a king's rule before his people. Kale would be standing before his pack, about to receive a crown, believing his true one lost forever, believing her lost forever too. Lyra did not hesitate. She sold nearly everything she owned for passage north, and she ran, day and night, stopping only when her body forced her to. She arrived at the edge of Ashbourne territory, just as the sun was setting on the day before the ceremony, exhausted, road-worn, and barely recognizable as the woman who had once walked those lands with pride. Guards at the outer gate did not know her. 3 years had changed her face, thinned her frame, and left scars across her arms that had not existed before. When she tried to explain who she was, they laughed, not unkindly, but with the certainty of people who had attended her funeral years ago. "The Luna is dead," one guard told her gently, as though speaking to someone confused or unwell. "I am sorry for your loss, but you cannot pass." Lyra did not argue. She simply waited until nightfall, and using knowledge of the territory that no outsider could have known, the paths through the forest, the gap in the eastern wall used by young pack members sneaking out at night, she found her way inside. She hid until morning, watching the pack prepare for the coronation, hearing familiar voices she had not heard in 3 years, feeling both comforted and heartbroken by how normal everything seemed, how life had continued without her. The ceremony began at midday. The great hall was filled with pack members dressed in their finest clothes, the elders standing in a solemn line, and Kale at the center, dressed in formal black and silver, his expression carefully composed in the way Lyra remembered him wearing when he wanted to hide his true feelings. A substitute crown, plain and hastily made to replace the one that had been lost, sat on a velvet cushion, waiting to be placed on his head. Lyra pushed through the crowd at the back of the hall, ignoring the startled looks and murmurs that followed her. Guards moved to stop her, but she was faster, slipping between them with a desperation that came from knowing this was her only chance. She reached the front of the hall just as the head elder lifted the substitute crown, just as the ceremonial words began. And there, in front of the entire pack, she stepped forward and placed the true Ashbourne crown on the cushion beside the false one. The hall fell silent. The elder froze, staring down at the crown that should not exist. The crown everyone believed lost forever, its sigil catching the light in a way the substitute never could. Kale turned, first with confusion, then with a stillness that seemed to stop his heart entirely, because standing before him was a woman he had mourned for 3 years, thinner and scarred, but unmistakably, impossibly alive. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then something in Kale's expression broke open, the careful composure he had worn like armor for 3 years finally cracking. He crossed the hall in a few long strides, his hands shaking as he reached for her face, as though he needed to touch her to believe she was real. "Lyra," he said, her name barely a whisper, but it carried through the silent hall like a shout. "I'm here," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry it took so long." The mate bond between them, dormant for 3 years, but never truly broken, flared back to life the moment their skin touched, a warm golden light shimmering faintly around their joined hands, visible to everyone in the hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The elders, who had spent years insisting Lyra Sinclair was gone forever, stood frozen in disbelief. No one could deny what they were seeing. The bond did not lie. Cale pulled her into his arms, careful of her injuries though he did not yet know their full extent, and held her as though letting go might make her disappear again. Around them, the pack began to understand what they were witnessing, and the silence broke into a rising wave of astonished whispers, then quiet weeping, then finally, joy. Later that evening, once the ceremony had been paused and Lyra had been given food, rest and gentle care from the pack healers, she told Cale everything. The ambush. The trading network. The moon-silver collar that had stolen her memories. The years of not knowing her own name. Marta. The healer who had freed her. The long journey to find the crown and make her way home. Cale listened to every word, his jaw tight with anger at what had been done to her, but his hands never left hers, as though he needed the contact to stay steady. They will answer for this, he said quietly when she finished. The Draven pack, the traders, all of them. But that is for tomorrow. Tonight, you are home. The coronation resumed the next day, but it was no longer the solitary ceremony it had been meant to be. Cale stood before his pack with Lyra beside him, both of them dressed in formal Ashbourne colors, and when the head elder lifted the true crown, the one she had risked everything to bring back, Cale took it from the cushion himself. He did not place it on his own head first. Instead, he turned to Lyra, and with hands that trembled with emotion rather than nerves, he placed a smaller matching crown, quickly prepared overnight by the pack's jewelers, upon her head, declaring her before the entire pack as his Luna, restored to her rightful place. Only then did he accept his own crown, and the hall erupted into howls of celebration that echoed far beyond the walls of the great hall, carrying across the territory like a promise fulfilled. The king who had ruled alone for 3 years, cold and grieving, was gone. In his place stood a king and his queen, together again, scarred by everything they had endured but unbroken, their bond shining as brightly as the crowns upon their heads. That night, as the celebration continued below, Cale and Lyra stood together on the balcony overlooking the packlands, her hand in his, the golden light of the bond still faintly glowing between them. "I never stopped looking for a way back to you," Lyra said softly. "Even when I didn't know your name, some part of me was searching." Cale pressed a kiss to her forehead, his voice thick with everything he had carried for 3 long years. "And I never stopped waiting," he said. "I just didn't know I was allowed to hope." Below them, the pack howled on into the night, celebrating not just a coronation, but a reunion no one had believed possible, a king no longer ruling alone, and a queen who had found her way home.